Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so continuing on with our Dawn of X series of videos, we're covering Excalibur. Now remember, for those of you guys who are joining us, we're going through each one of these individually for the first story arc. And then after that, we'll just kind of go from there, right? One of the things that I believe when it comes to new launches or new comics is you should always give it one story arc and then let that story arc determine whether or not you enjoy it, right? You can't really determine whether or not a story is going to be good based on like the first comic, right? It doesn't really work that way because things can change drastically over the course of a single line of comics, right? Like literally the story of Superior Spider-Man. Like Dr. Octopus is just like a villain who gets the body of Peter Parker, but it's like it becomes an amazing story by the time you get to the end, right? So you can't really use like a single issue to judge the whole thing. But here's the thing about Excalibur. The way this is being written, the way this is being done, it's really, really cool. But if you don't care anything about like Camelot and like Morgan Le Fay and things like that, you're not gonna like this story. Because it's literally 100% that stuff, but we need to talk about this. So the idea of Camelot is that in Marvel Comics, it largely follows the Arthurian mythos, right? Camelot was a kingdom of King Arthur. You had Guinevere, you had Lancelot, all that kind of cool stuff. Ultimately, in Marvel Superheroes number 17 in 1968, Camelot fell, and the result was that it was moved to Otherworld. Now, Otherworld is a dimension that exists in Marvel Comics that's basically outside the multiverse, right? So it kind of exists as part of it, but not necessarily at the same time. Insofar that the reason why is because what you have is the wizard Merlin. And Merlin basically created a group called the Captain Britain Corps. And the Captain Britain Corps is this organization that's like the Green Lantern Corps from DC Comics, but instead of the Green Lantern Corps protecting each sector of space, the Captain Britain Corps, each member protects its own universe. Now, for the most part, it doesn't really matter just because there are such exceedingly powerful beings in those universes that Captain Britain couldn't even begin to hope to stand a chance against. But it works because you can call in a bunch of Captain Britons to face off against a particular threat. But that's one of the things that's kind of going on here. Morgan Le Fay is probably one of the more powerful beings in Marvel Comics when it comes to using magic. She was one of the students of Merlin. She was actually considered to be the replacement for Doctor Strange after he lost his ability to become Sorcerer Supreme. When she decides to rain hellfire down on you, like it's coming. She's really, 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 really powerful. But the other thing about this is Arthur Pendragon, King Arthur himself. During Dan Abnett's run on Hercules, which I think is considered Hercules Volume 2 in 2016, Arthur Pendragon was summoned by Hercules, and I believe he fought in that small little war, that little conflict that was going on there. But essentially, since then, leading up until now, he's vanished. We didn't really know what was going on with him. Now, a lot of that was due to the fact that at the time, Marvel wasn't really publishing anything on King Arthur. So it was just kind of like, okay, whatever, it's out there doing its thing. But within the confines of this story, the whole idea is like, he's vanished. Like we don't really know where he is or what's going on. The other thing that's going on here is that within the kingdom of Camelot itself, what you essentially have here, at least as Morgan Le Fay interprets it, is kind of like an invasion of sorts. It's this idea that there are forces within Camelot working against her. Now, technically, she's the steward of Camelot. She's basically the one who's essentially ruling in place of King Arthur. And so because of the fact that she was the one that initially led to the downfall of Camelot, and she is more often than not depicted as a villain, it does kind of make sense that they would be working against her. But we don't really know who the White Witch is. We're not really sure exactly what all is going on there. Instead, what we end up doing here is we actually end up picking up with Psylocke, with Betsy Braddock. Now, one of the things that I want to point out here is this idea of Psylocke basically going back to being a Caucasian woman again. The reason why is back in Uncanny X-Men 256, Chris Claremont had this idea to basically rework Psylocke in her entirety and basically put her mind more or less in the body of a Japanese woman named Kwanin. Now, that's probably explained better in our video on Psylocke Explained, so you're welcome to go check it out. The long and short of it is that for decades, Psylocke was basically in the body of a Japanese woman, and that was kind of her identity going forward, right? That's how people associated with her. Most people who got into the X-Men in like the 90s remember Psylocke as that version. This really ran up until Mystery in Madripoor as part of the Return of Wolverine. And the reason why was because the Return of Wolverine in Marvel Comics kind of marks this paradigm shift with regards to the X-Men, right? Insofar as Marvel's no longer just kind of shuffling them to the background and whatever happens, happens. Instead, it was kind of bringing them back into the forefront and really leading up to Jonathan Hickman's run on the team. And so as a result of that, there were a lot of changes that were made to existing characters. Most of those came by way of Jonathan Hickman during House and Powers of X, when different X-Men were basically resurrected. But during Mystery in Madripoor, Psylocke got her body back. She got her original body back. And so that's why right now, when you look at her, she's essentially her original Caucasian self. The funny thing about this is she basically ends up going to visit with Apocalypse. And this is kind of an important thing because what this does is it shows what Apocalypse is doing now. And that was really the big question that I had going out, coming out of House and Powers of X is, what's Apocalypse doing? What's his role going to be, right? If he's part of the Mutant Council, is he biding his time to basically somehow somehow take over and like crush everybody or test them all or whatever the case is. What's going on with this character? And what this really shows is that Apocalypse is actually turning over a new leaf. The biggest issue with this, and one of the big things that Apocalypse is trying to figure out at the moment, is why it is that one of their doors from Krakoa cannot access Otherworld. This is kind of a cool thing, because what this shows is that Apocalypse is aware of places like Otherworld. He's aware of other dimensions and the multiverse, right? He's aware of more, that there's more than just Earth. But what this does is this basically picks up with a wholly new character, kind of transitioning away from Krakoa, and it picks up with a wholly new character. Now, this character's name is Marianna Stern, and in reality, she's part of what's called the Coven, Coven Solar Blackwood. This, as far as I'm aware, is wholly new. But in reality, it's this, the Coven that she's a part of isn't the real big takeaway here. The real big takeaway here is how magic works in Marvel Comics. This is kind of a big thing here, right? This is a huge revelation that goes on here, because while they're, running their enchantments and so on and so forth, what they end up doing is basically unintentionally invoking Morgan Le Fay, insofar as Morgan Le Fay realizes that somebody outside of Otherworld, basically in the main Marvel universe, is using magic, and ultimately she deems it as somebody who seems to be kind of intruding on her territory. Now, of course, she kind of jumps into this and basically says, like, my entire kingdom's under attack. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Even Morgan Le Fay doesn't really know what's happening. And so what she basically does is she tasks the Coven Blackwood. She says, like, you guys need to go figure out what's going on. If you don't figure out what's going on, I'm cutting magic off to all of you. And that's a really important thing here. And the reason why is because the use of magic in Marvel Comics comes in a couple different forms, right? You have magic like the Scarlet Witch or like Doctor Strange, which is usually magic given to them by like other entities and beings that are out there, right? So Doctor Strange doesn't really have magic insofar as it's inherent to him. He uses the abilities of like Watum and Sidorak and so on and so forth. And Scarlet Witch channels the power of Chthon. But what you also have in Marvel Comics are beings like Agatha Harkness. And Agatha Harkness is an actual witch, right? She, boil, toil and trouble, using a giant cauldron, different things like that, killing rodents and so on and so forth. She uses actual magic, but the magic she uses is channeled directly from Camelot itself, from the magic of Merlin. And so the result of this is that in order for her to be able to continue using magic, and even the Coven to be able to continue using magic, Morgan Le Fay basically has to keep those channels open, which she can close at any point in time. What it does is kind of offer an explanation on the other half of magic in Marvel that we always knew was there, but never really got a full in-depth explanation on in terms of how it worked or how these abilities were channeled and given to various people. This is kind of a cool thing, because what it means is that Morgan Le Fay does not know who's attacking her kingdom. So we're not really given all the answers in this. We're just kind of left wondering a little bit, which makes sense because it's the first issue. Wouldn't really make any sense to wrap the whole arc up in the first issue. What reason would you have to read the other 5? But there's other cool little things that come out of this. For example, Jamie Braddock is basically resurrected, so he's essentially brought back from the dead. That's one of the things to keep in mind here, guys, is over the years between House of M running up until the modern era, a lot of X-Men have died, right? Like a lot of mutants out there have been killed by one means or another. What Dawn of X is designed to do is kind of reset the X-Men back to the status quo, to not necessarily pretend like nothing after House of M happened. We know all that stuff took place, but it's designed to kind of bring the team back to its roots. And so resurrecting and bringing back a lot of these mutants who have been away for a long time is kind of a cool thing to see here, because as we know with Jamie Braddock, he can manipulate reality, right? So he's an exceedingly powerful character to have on their team. It's very important that he's there. But for the character of Apocalypse, it's like, why in the world aren't these things being enabled, right? Like, why aren't we able to basically, access this portal and get into Otherworld, because there are mutant beings who reside in there. And so the question is, how do we access that area? And so it's kind of a cool thing, because what you end up basically getting, it's Betsy Braddock and Captain Britain who essentially teleport to this location. Now, here's the important thing to understand about Captain Britain. For all the abilities that Brian Braddock has, his powers are not strictly his own. And the reason why I say that is because when Brian Braddock was presented with the possibility, or at least presented with the offering of becoming Captain Britain by Merlin and his daughter Roma, he was basically presented with 2 artifacts. The first one was the Amulet of Right, and the second one was the Sword of Might. And the idea behind these 2 things is that depending on what you choose, your role and your costume and your powers to a degree will change. But regardless, it's basically an offering to become a Captain Britain. Brian Braddock chose the Amulet of Right, and what the amulet did is basically, as long as he wore it around his neck, it would allow him to channel the powers of Captain Britain. It would give him flight and energy projection and durability, different things like that. The Sword of Might itself would basically allow powers that were almost identical to the traditional Captain Britain abilities, but in turn, you would also have like this, insanely powerful artifact in terms of a weapon. Now, the amulet represented life and the sword represented death, but it's kind of a cool little thing. The idea behind this, though, is that Brian Braddock channeling the power of the Captain Britain Corps, while he's not all powerful, he is a guy that you do want on your side, right? He's pretty capable in terms of his abilities. The issue is that with him traveling basically to Otherworld alongside Betsy Braddock, what we end up learning is that what's going on with this device here, at least, this kind of invasion that she sees, is essentially the springing up of these portals portals by mutants from Krakoa, right? So this idea that this portal basically sprung up, she doesn't really know how it works or what's going on with it, and so she ultimately ended up kind of cutting it off so nobody could get through that portal and into the realm of Otherworld, which is within her power to do. Apocalypse and his guys don't know this, and that's kind of the question that's being asked here. The issue with this is that Morgan Le Fay alongside Mordred have always been enemies of Captain Britain, and so of course when Captain Britain shows up here, it's her chance to seize his power and to basically take it. Merlin has been dead for a long time, and so has Roma, right? So it's not like they're going to step in and they're going to protect Captain Britain and all these guys. That's not going to play out that way. Instead, you have Psylocke fending off against Morgan Le Fay as best she can, but she's no real match here. And so as a result of that, what ends up happening is Morgan Le Fay basically transforms Captain Britain into her Black Knight. Now, this depiction of the Black Knight of Morgan Le Fay is not to be confused with Dane Whitman, right? The wielder of the Ebony Blade, which is to say the sword that basically becomes more and more evil, more or less as time goes on, demands blood and so on and so forth. These are two distinctly different things. All this is designed to do is basically illustrate a corrupted Captain Britain, more or less. You know, a guy that basically works in service of Morgan Le Fay and can't really do anything on his own. I mean, he can to a degree, like he goes as far as to give the amulet directly to Psylocke so that she can channel its power and essentially become the new Captain Britain. But while all that's going on, you end up having Apocalypse, who gathers together Rogue and Trinary and basically uses Rogue's abilities as a mean to kind of try to tap into the power of the Krakoan Gate and then in turn enter in and bring out Betsy Braddock. The problem with this and the issue that you end up facing while all this is going down is that ultimately the end result is achieved. The sword of Betsy Braddock comes flying out, but the Krakoan Gate is shattered. And what this does is kind of create like this mental backlash, right? And we've seen that happen before with the character of Rogue. If Rogue is basically, if she's exposed to too much power too fast, it'll put her into a comatose state. And that's exactly what happens here, right? She basically ends up going into a catatonic state. Betsy Braddock essentially, you know, is kind of left there to face off against, you know, the Black Knight of Morgan Le Fay, as well as Morgan Le Fay herself, which ultimately she ends up using the amulet to essentially make her escape as best she can, becoming the new Captain Britain in the process. But for the character of Rogue, and this is what I want to talk about here for a second, for the character of Rogue, her being left in a comatose state here, I want to kind of jump back to what's called the Hecatomb, right? This is kind of a big thing. The Hecatomb was this massive bomb, this kind of weapon that was created by the Shi'ar Empire that was designed for the purpose of inflicting massive loss of life, right? But the idea was that when Rogue touched it, she ended up absorbing all these minds, right? Just like billions and billions of minds all at the same time. And the result of that is that it was exceedingly overwhelming to her and shut her down and put her in a comatose state where she laid until after the events of Messiah Complex. But that's kind of the big thing here, is that what this does is, one, it knocks out Rogue, which is one of the more powerful characters of the X-Men, but it also gives us potential into what it is that she saw in the moments that this gateway basically shattered. Betsy Braddock comes out as the new Captain Britain, which is cool, but the biggest takeaway from all this is the biggest thing to kind of keep in mind here, is that what you end up getting is Marianna Stern, who basically kills her coven, right? Like kills the Solar Blackwood coven and then leaves and joins the Clan Akaba. She becomes a high priestess for the Clan Akaba. And this is important because the Clan Akaba has been shown as both allies of Apocalypse as well as enemies of Apocalypse. What this looks like is the version of Clan Akaba that basically worships Apocalypse. And so what it looks like is going on here is Apocalypse has engineered all of this stuff. For what reason? We don't know. But Apocalypse seems to have engineered all of this, set all these things in motion so he can make his moves somewhere along the line and then implement whatever plan it is that he wants to implement. But based on this first issue, it looks like Apocalypse is doing business as usual. He's being a bad guy. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.